Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us here today. I am Joo-young Park from the Treasury Group at the Export-Import Bank of Korea. And it's an honor to be here with the Ministry of Economy and Finance, along with KT, to be representing Korean issuers this year at the Bell. As many of you may know, we are one of the largest issuers here in Korea. And that being said, it's really important for us to have a strong relationship as well as a strong communication channel with our investors, our potential investors, and market participants. So with that being said, we'd first like to thank the Bell and the joint arrangers for inviting us to this event of the 2020 Korean Global Corporate IR, where we believe that we can strengthen this relationship and demonstrate Kexim's strong presence in the debt capital market today. So, although you may already be familiar with who we are, I'm going to assume that there is an audience that doesn't know exactly what we do as a Korean ECA. So I would like to first start off with an overview of Kexim and talk about our role in policy, credit, and financials, and then move on to our most recent funding activities. So, as an official export credit agency of Korea, Kexim's policy mandate is to support Korean enterprises conducting business overseas by providing comprehensive export loans and guarantee programs. So we are a 100% government-owned policy bank with about 68% directly owned by the government and the rest being held by the central bank as well as another policy bank, which also happens to be government-owned. And such ownership is actually described in the Kexim Act, where by this act, the Korean government is to support Kexim solvency in the event of default. So here on the top left, you can see Kexim Act Article 37, which states the compensation for amount of loss. So the net losses, the annual net losses of the Export-Import Bank of Korea shall be offset each year by the reserve. And if the reserve be insufficient, the government shall provide funds to cover the deficit. And thankfully, fortunately, this has not been triggered in the past because we haven't experienced loss which exceeds the reserve. While we receive full government support, we also align our businesses with the economic policies of the government. So as a policy arm, we are also responsible for the operation of two government-entrusted funds, the Economic Development Cooperation Fund, more well known as EDCF, and the Inter-Korea Cooperation Fund, abbreviated into IKCF. So these two funds, although we do manage them, we do not have them under our financial statements as they are managed under separate accounts. And reflecting the government's strong support, Kexim's credit ratings are equivalent to the government's, being AA2 by Moody's, AA by S&P, and AA- by Fitch. And Kexim is exempt from applying standalone credit ratings because rating agencies rate Kexim as a quasi-government entity based on the government's extraordinary support. And such judgment is based on the assessment that Kexim's public policy mandate to support Korea's export and import sectors strictly align with the objectives of the government. And the next slide should give you an idea of what our general capital base looks like. And the key takeaway here would be the regular capital injections by the Korean government, which demonstrates the importance of Kexim as an economic policy arm. So, as you can see here, the government has regularly injected capital to enhance our financial ability. So, if you look at the graph on the top right, you can see the cumulative capital steadily increasing with recent contributions shown in the following table at the bottom left. In 2020 alone, Kexim received capital injection amounting to 578 billion won, 390 billion, which has been earmarked for Kexim's COVID-19 response program. And as of the first half of this year, the common stock stands at 11.87 trillion won, with a BIS ratio of 13.6%. And you may be wondering why our BIS ratio has slightly decreased the first half of this year compared to last year. So the reasons can be boiled down into two main parts. So the first, there was an increase in our COVID-19 related loan exposure. And two, the appreciation of the US dollars at the time led to an increase in dollar-denominated loan exposure. So both of these reasons have led to an increase in our RWA, or risk-weighted assets, that made our BIS ratio fall. However, as you can see here at the bottom right, Kexim has always maintained a substantial buffer against the BIS regulation threshold, and this year was no exception. Now, let's discuss Kexim's policy mandate. So, as I mentioned, our policy mandate focuses on supporting Korean companies conducting international business with loans and guarantees, whether that business is exports, imports, overseas investments, and etc. And out of these businesses, we do play a especially pivotal role in promoting the nation's exports. So the bar chart on the top right shows that Kexim has been consistently contributing over about 10% of Korea's exports. And in those exports, our contribution is the highest in the shipbuilding and infrastructure industrial sector. So shipbuilding and infrastructure projects basically require a large amount of funding for a long period of time. And this cannot be fully covered by commercial banks alone. And that is why Kexim, along with many other ECAs, are there to finance these mega projects as one of our main businesses. And if you take break down our loans by geography, you can see that our loan portfolio is well diversified by region. So we have the US, Europe, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and etc. Okay, so we've emphasized the fact that we are a very important policy arm in terms of the government implementing economic policies. And recently, the Korean government's efforts to strengthen the economy were twofold. So to aid Korean exporters in diversifying their markets to countries such as India, Vietnam, Russia, Uzbekistan, etc., to reduce our trade dependency on US and China. And B, to strengthen and promote new growth sectors like fintech, biotech, and future automobiles. And as a policy arm, Kexim has been expanding our financial support to these agendas. So on this first bar chart you see here, you can see that we have a substantial and growing exposure to Southeast Asia and India with our new Southern policy, and to Mongolia and Central Asian countries with regards to our Northern policy. And we're currently very focused on targeting both regions as important export markets. And Kexim is also fully on board with the new growth industries policy as well. And as such, our exposure in these industries have been rising rapidly the past couple of years. And we believe that these industries will become a new growth engine that can vitalize the economy and diversify Korea's export portfolio. Furthermore, as more and more SMEs or small and medium-sized enterprises are making entrance into the global market, we strive to facilitate these SMEs to strengthen their competitiveness alongside the government. From the bottom graph on the right, you can see that the number of the companies we support and finance, as well as the executed loan amount, sharply increased over the past 3 years. We don't just do SMEs, we also do support large projects. So recently we actually financed £190 million to the Silvertown Tunnel PPP project in the United Kingdom and $375 million to the LNG liquefaction plant construction project in Nigeria. Now I will just go briefly over our asset portfolio. So as of the first half of this year, our loans outstanding reached up to almost 80 trillion won, and our guarantees outstanding amounted to 32 trillion won. And when the exposure is broken down by industry, you can see that ours is quite well diversified, with industrial plants and shipbuilding accounting for the largest percentage, and the rest being mainly auto and other manufacturing sectors. And when it comes to non-performing loans, due to the stagnation in the shipbuilding industry in the past, Kexim's NPL ratio in 2016 did reach its peak. However, the ratio dropped back to 1.5% in 2018 due to a decrease in refund guarantees to shipbuilders and write-off of some of the bad assets. And as you can see, our NPL ratio as of the first half of 2020 still remains at 1.5%. And on the upper right, you can find our profit figures. So in 2016, we recorded a net loss for the first time because of the increase in provisions. However, right after 2016, we actually achieved a turnaround in profit with significant improvement in asset quality and made a net profit of approximately 0.3 trillion won in 2019 last year. And finally, the graph at the bottom right shows our net interest margin. So as you know, the recent low interest rate environment has been negatively influencing the overall banking industry's NIM. So hence the decreasing trend in our NIM figure as well. So although profitability is not our main mission, we ensure you that we are keeping a close eye to maintain healthy profit margins. So now we are on to the second part of the presentation, our bond overview. So here I would like to exhibit our most recent funding activities with a focus on this year. So because we support international business of Korean companies, a substantial amount of our assets is in foreign currencies, mostly in US dollars. And we fund approximately $10 billion each year from the capital market. And now, because the funding size is pretty large, it is crucial for us to secure diversity in terms of our investor base and funding markets, which is why we visit various public markets each year. So this year, for example, we've tapped into the euro, the kangaroo, and the USD dollar market. And last year, we've issued in Mexican peso alongside a Formosa bond in Australian dollars. And in terms of liability breakdown by currency, Kexim's loans to support Korean companies are mostly in US dollars. So to match the currency of our liability to that of our assets, our non-USD bonds are swapped into USD. So after the cross-currency swap, we hold around 74% of our liability in dollars. And I guess this brings us to, the crown jewel of our presentation, our public offerings for 2020. So our first public offering this year was amid the outbreak of COVID-19. And despite the volatility and the uncertainty in the market, we were able to secure a solid book order, which represents strong investor demands for AA credit SSA bonds. Here, Kexim accomplished the lowest spread among Korean issuers, excluding the ROK, since the global financial crisis in 2008-2009. And in April, this is when the pandemic really hit the global market and uncertainty prevailed. But Kexim was able to successfully issue a USD and Euro bond, paving the way for other Korean issuers to reopen funding in our global markets. And our Euro tranche here actually was issued as a green bond. And as a pioneer of green bonds in Korea, we have been revisiting the green bond market for the past 5 consecutive years. And I'll cover this more in detail in our next slide. In May, we tapped into the kangaroo market, which we visit on an annual basis. And our offering this year was of 700 million Australian dollars, and was actually the first kangaroo bond from an Asian issuer after the outbreak of COVID-19. And it was also one of the few issuance where an offshore issuer has printed below the yield curve of the big 4 banks in Australia. Then our most recent public offering was actually this September, triple tranche USD and Euro global bond. And it was well received by over 250 accounts, including many central banks, MDBs, sovereign wealth funds, etc. And the deal built up actually a book size of over 5 times our target size, which reaffirmed overseas investors' confidence in Kexim bonds as a safe asset. And here, Kexim achieved the lowest negative yield for a 3-year Euro in Korea, as well as the lowest yield and spread for a 10-year USD tranche. Our Euro tranche from September was a social bond in which we designated the proceeds from the Euro tranche for use of SME support in response to COVID-19. And last but not least, along with our public offerings, Kexim is also very active with private placements. So this year alone, we've issued around 42 bonds in 8 different currencies, and this expands our bond portfolio to carry around 30 currencies. And one of these private placements was actually Korea's first SOFR bond, which we hope can serve as a benchmark for prospective SOFR issuers in South Korea. And as I mentioned a little earlier, Kexim has been a steady player in the ESG market ever since we issued Korea's first green bond in 2013. So our green bond proceeds are used worldwide in various sectors, as you can see on the bottom right. And the proceeds are mostly engaged in projects for hydroelectric energy, solar photovoltaic, and secondary batteries. Now, and this year was a little special for us because the Euro tranche of our most recent public offering was our debut in social bonds. Now, through this COVID-19 response social bond, Kexim intends to advance commitment in upholding sustainable initiatives through supporting SMEs affected by COVID-19. And as such, we hope to continuously uphold sustainable initiatives through supporting SMEs and communicate our continued dedication in these ESG markets. And as of now, you can see that our current ESG-related liability accumulates to approximately 2.5 billion USD, including our latest social bond. And we plan on increasing that number with commitment to the ESG agenda of the green and social bond principles. Okay, finally, this is our last slide. It's the one that depicts Kexim's strong presence in the international capital market. And as a frequent issuer, we aim towards setting a benchmark yield curve for Korean papers and facilitating participation of other Korean issuers in the market. As I wrap up my presentation, we, Kexim, would like to assert two things. So, as one of the representative issuers here in Korea, one, Kexim will hold itself accountable and procure right funding at the right time, with a keen eye on the global market at all times. And two, Kexim will strive to raise the status of Korean issuers by our market-friendly and innovative strategies to target the global capital market. Even in such a volatile market as that of this year, Kexim really managed to pull through and have a very successful year by cleverly utilizing dual, triple tranches, ESG labels, and etc. So we will continue to deliver the Korean as well as the international debt capital market the same type of commitment and integrity you have seen from us in the future as well. So thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please reach us throughout the bell and we will get back to you as soon as we can. So thank you so much for listening.